I'm Lin-Manuel Miranda, and you're listening to Hard NOC Life.
Well, it's the NOC in full color, you see me? The Hard NOC Life, comics, movies, and TV, yeah. Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch
Hey,
it on your screen.
how you doing? Welcome to the Hard NOC Show. It's Keith Chow, Hard NOC Life. Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled Hard NOC Life. If you're tuning in for a Mandalorian recap, we're actually going to take a pause on that for a couple weeks and present to you a couple special episodes. This is the first of those two special episodes. I've brought back the OG Hard NOC Live co-host. We're here to talk about De La Soul. By the time you listen to this podcast, it'll be 1 month from De La Day when De La Soul's music was finally available for streaming and the internet writ large. And who better to have back on the podcast to talk about De La Soul, the Daisy Age, and all of that than Shawn Taylor. Welcome back, Shawn.
Thank you, man. It is really dope to be back, especially talking about my favorite group of all time. I don't care what genre it is.
Just me, myself, and Shawn. You know, I mean, it's funny. Like, as I said, we're recording this just a few days after they released their music on streaming services, and you know, it's funny that like for 30 years, De La, one of the most influential hip hop groups ever, but because their music wasn't widely available, we're not brought up in the conversations a lot of times, and especially like a lot of people who talk about music now. So, but it was kind of like amazing and surprising, and but also like bittersweet that you saw all these people like celebrating De La, and I almost feel like, where have you been?
That's the problem with hip hop and other things that stem from Black culture. It's that it becomes transparent, right? Like we don't divorce polka from its origins, right? But when Black people do stuff, it becomes global culture, and then it becomes transparent, and then this disappears. And De La Soul has been literally making some of the most innovative hip hop music for 30 some odd years, but they never had the benefit of having their catalog cemented. And so it just becomes this like impressionistic idea of hip hop for a lot of the younger generations, as opposed to being a part of their firmament. And not to mention, you know, we've seen hip hop go through these ebbs and flows, right? We've seen hip hop start off as party and bullshit. Then it got super Black power. Then it got multicultural. Then it's now back to some party and bullshit, but now with a side of extra violent. More than this is more violent now. Chicago drill, New York drill, UK drill, all this stuff is more violent now than NWA and the rest, because those guys were kind of clowns when you think about it. These kids really look at life as a nickel. And the one thing what was so dope about De La and, you know, dropping the single in 88 and the album in 89 was that they were an antidote to the mythology of Black hypermasculinity. And I think that's why there was such a resistance to them, because people didn't know another way how to be Black and male.
I mean, it's kind of a derisive term in a lot of ways, but like that whole backpack era, right? Like is kind of like I said, it feels like a derisive term. It's almost like how like grunge artists don't like being referred to as grunge, or like shoegaze artists don't like because shoegaze, but like
neo soul.
You're right, neo, right? But like backpack rap was a thing, like the native tongues, and the Daisy Age, and all of that stuff, because it set itself apart.
Yeah. And they were the proto backpackers, and
not just from gangster rap, but from like pop rap, like the line from Tribe, right? Like rap is not pop. If you call it that, then stop, right? Like it's to your point about like rap going mainstream. It's just funny that like that whole era does kind of get glossed over. I feel like when people think back to like late 80s, early 90s, I think rightly so, they think of Wu-Tang and they think of NWA. Like I feel like
Wu-Tang and Tribe came up the same day,
right? 93, like, and then like 90, they talk about 93, like when Midnight Marauders came out, but like, you know, everyone talks about Enter the Chambers, but like that's the same day Midnight Marauders came out.
The same day. And that's what was so dope about, that's why I hate streaming, even though I'm so happy De La Soul on streaming. It's because I had to go to the I went to, Rest in Peace Tower. I went to, Fat Beats back in home, or if I'm in California now where I live now, going to Rasputin, going to Amoeba, meeting people in the stacks, talking to them. Oh, have you heard this? Oh, you see this special herbs in of doom? I didn't see that. Have you heard Roots Maneuver from England? No. And you would have this beautiful hip hop exchange. And now with digital culture, we are ahistoric. And so we don't really have a sense of lineage, whereas a rock and roll dude will tell you who they got their guitar from, and they'd be proud of it. But these young hip hop cats, I'm a rock star, I'm not a rapper, but blood, you're rapping to hip hop beats. Like, what are you talking about? And so they actually try to divorce them. So it's another divorce. Whereas De La Soul, Tribe, Whole Natives, Tongues, and a couple others, they didn't so much divorce themselves from mainstream rap. They just created a new lane for themselves. Yeah. They still consider themselves part of the ecosystem. They created a new lane. These new cats are completely divorcing themselves from their history. And so it makes you wonder why.
Because, I mean, that's the thing. Like, when De La came out, like, there are tracks on their first few albums. I mean, they're talking about the record industry. They're talking about the hip hop industry. They're talking about these clowns, right? And then how like wannabe gangsters and stuff. And they're talking about like to your point, like this is late 80s, early 90s stuff. I mean, I'm curious now that they're back. And it's not like they ever went away, right? Like they're still, and the shadow castle across this whole thing is, of course, the passing of Trugoy, like literally several weeks before De La was, re-entering the conversation. And we'll definitely talk about Plug 2 in a second, but I'm curious, like, what is like Pasanu's and Mace's view of the current landscape of hip hop? Because I mean, granted, two old heads on the podcast right now talking about it. There are times I don't recognize hip hop today compared to.
I don't recognize it as a culture. I recognize it as an industry. Right? I don't see it as the culture that it used to be. Whereas I'll tell you a really funny story. I was in the Philippines visiting my wife's folks, her maternal side, pardon me, and we were in Karkar, which is like in Cebu, one of the last islands in the South Philippines. We were driving in basically a rainforest, and like on a burnt out church wall was spray painted in Snoop Dogg in the middle of the forest. I mean, hip hop is everywhere, but people everywhere but here, they're seeing it. I mean, for us, it was a tool for liberation for about 30 seconds. Then it became a tool for financial liberation. Then that became a completely like a $1 billion behemoth. But you go to like Palestine, you go to Philippines, you go to parts of Japan, people are still living the culture of hip hop. And it's not nostalgic. It's evolved in a way that we've left behind here, because I think there's a sort of, I'm not a big Afro pessimist because I think it's a weird philosophy or idea, but I think there is a level of pessimism in Atlantic Black folks that we're going to make it, they're going to take it anyway, so let's just move on to something else. And so what happens is we lose legacy. Whereas classical music guys and blues musicians and country and folk, they are happy about their lineage. For some odd reason, a lot of Black folks treat hip hop like Warner treats DC, and they're embarrassed by the legacy and the lineage of what it is, and trying to make something completely different as opposed to carving a new lane off the legacy. They completely divorce themselves from it, and I don't understand why that is.
Because I think there's also like this irrational fear of being considered corny
and soft. Absolutely,
and soft. Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's almost like a stereotype, whereas you're not really trying to. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel a little underqualified to talk about it, but like when the video for Buddy dropped in like 89, 88, and it was like, it blew my mind as a kid. First of all, I'm like this fat Chinese kid growing up in a middle of nowhere town in Virginia. Yo MTV Raps was one of your only cultural like lifelines out, right? But I mean, I loved Kumo D growing up. I loved LL. But then seeing, it was like this double hit of like, you had PE coming out with It Takes a Nation, and then you had like the Buddy video dropping on the same show. And it was like kind of showing the spectrum of what hip hop could be.
Yes.
It wasn't just braggadocio.
No. And who hosted it, right? Because you had Fab Five Freddy, who was part of the old guard.
Yeah.
The original host hosting it. Then you moved to, then you kind of get the clown antics of Dre and Ed.
Yeah.
But I mean, which is still fine, because I think that what hip hop is missing is a sense of humor. I mean, which is great. That's why
which is what the De La had.
Markey. Because De La had more than humor. They were whimsical, and that's what we don't have in hip hop anymore.
I mean, they were one of the first. I wouldn't say first. I don't mean to say first, but like at least in the culture, in the firmament, to kind of celebrate the Black nerd, right? Like,
Oh, they were the very first Afro geeks. Like we can, because if you really think about like when hip hop first started, everybody's looking like punk rock strippers. Right? Everybody's, tight spandex and spikes and all that. And so, which makes me laugh now when everybody's looking at A$AP Rocky and trying to question his masculinity. I'm like, dude, he's with Rihanna. Like, calm down. But go look at Grandmaster Flash. Go look at Melly Mel back in the day. It's different, right? But what they were, like, if Run DMC kind of like destroyed the hip hop costume and became the everyman dress of hip hop, De La, Tribe, and all that, they became the risk takers. Like black medallions, no gold. That sounds simple, but if you understand at the time and how prevalent getting a gold chain was and how important that was, to issue that was a huge statement. Like De La, despite their Daisy Age exterior, are thugs. Like they will whoop your ass. And so, but for them to be brave enough to kind of take a lot of shots, they might not have been direct, they were huge cultural shots, was actually super revolutionary. In which ways I don't think people give them credit for. I don't think they give them credit for the bravery of their dress. I mean, like they were world builders. Their first 2 albums had comics in it. Hey, children, listen to this podcast. When you bought a CD back in the day and a tape back in the day, there were these paper inserts you can pull out that would tell you all the songs and who.
Well, and I feel like, I don't know if they were the originators, but I feel like they were one of the first hip hop artists to like include skits and, well thought out skits. And not, I feel like in some hip hop records, it got to a point where like the skits themselves were just kind of like filler to get from song to song. You know what I mean? But like their skits were, but to your point, whimsical and thematic, and that wasn't that, again. It made the album, kids. There were these things called albums where you had to listen to it linearly from beginning to end. But I feel like that's an innovation that they brought.
Oh, I mean, King T probably did the first hip hop skit in like 88, 87. But De La is the one who literally turned it into an art form. And you have to give Prince Paul the credit that's due, which is the producer of the first 3 albums, I think. And because I think Prince Paul doesn't get enough credit for what he's done for De La. I mean, first of all, Prince Paul is the weirdest guy in the world, like as far as his musical tastes and what he does. But if you really listen to they were doing this stuff non-digitally.
Right.
Like they were doing this stuff by hand. Unbelievable.
I mean, they were innovative when it came to like samples. They were, and that's truth be told, that's one of the reasons why it took 30 years for that shit to get to streaming.
Yeah,
because there's just so many samples.
And Tommy Silverman's a dick.
Well, yeah, and we'll definitely get to.
I mean, but he was like a slave master. But there's just something what De La Soul has done. But also, if you think about every De La Soul album that's come out, every single album is like wholly different than the one prior.
Yeah. I mean, the best example of that was like, to your point about the whole Daisy look and stuff, was kind of a little bit overblown. It was like, that was how the record industry set them apart from everybody else.
Yeah,
like,
they didn't
hip hop hippies or whatever, right? Like, and that wasn't necessarily them, which was so powerful about their second album, De La Is Dead, where like the album cover was a broken pot with a daisy falling out of it. You know what I'm saying? It was like, that's how many layers were under there. But I'm going back to 3 Feet High and the amount of samples. One thing that I did want to like bring up with the streaming is that one of the best skits in that album, talking about Prince Paul, was Cool Breeze, and how it like literally had like 30,000 samples in a like 30-second skit. And then I don't know if you've had a chance to like stream everything, but the Cool Breeze that's on the streaming version is completely neutered. It's like there's no more samples. And it's just like, oh dude, like someone needs to pay some money to get those samples cleared, because like that's what's something that is actually really like, because like Cool Breeze and the Rocks is a really funny song. But the crazy part is that every single album that came out streaming, there's significant changes if you are a De La fan and you know them prior. Like I have every single album on vinyl, on tape, and on CD. Like I have them all. And you're listening and like, wow, there's a lot. I thought about doing a post about cataloging the changes, but
I'm like, yes, it would take me a year.
Well, that's the one that really, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm clearly not as deep as you are, but that was the thing that stood out to me the most, because like that it goes straight from like the I forget the track list, but like there used to be this like at least 30-second interlude of all these like samples kind of talking to each other, like, referring to the word rock in different ways. And that's probably why it's got like Michael Jackson samples, it's got like Run DMC samples, but then it goes into like a game show type vibe. But then but like when you're listening to the album on Apple Music or whatever streaming service you use, it just goes straight to like the telephone ringing, and then
it goes right to the next
something
track.
was missing. You know what I mean? I was like, wait, did I accidentally hit skip?
But and then that alone, I mean, like rock's the best rock in music. I'm the king of rock and roll. Rock
I wanna rock with you. Yeah,
it wasn't. I mean, like, and Prince Paul needs to get his props. I know they were trying to get away from the more whimsical side of it, which they did, because I mean, you look at, you go from 3 Feet to De La Soul is Dead, which I think is a perfect B-side to 3 Feet High and Rising, which I wrote about in the 33 and the Third book, the B-sides. Which I wrote about there.
Shawn Taylor literally wrote the book on De La Soul, just so you know.
Then there was Balloon Mind State, the Balloon Mind State, which I think is probably their second most underrated album.
Wait,
and it didn't do that well. Oh, The Grind Date.
And that was the one that's been available for.
I think The Grind Date is probably their most innovative album in a lot of ways, and their most grown folks rap in a ways. Even though I love And the Anonymous Nobody, which I think is another album that doesn't get as much love as it deserves. But I think The Grind Date and Balloon Mind State are these albums that if you can get out of your own way and really sit and listen to, especially Balloon Mind State, you're going to be like, I cannot believe how dope this album is.
Well, but then I think like that's the thing, to your point about Prince Paul, like the shift from Balloon to Stakes is High was another like cataclysmic shift, I felt like, because like,
oh, absolutely,
Stakes is High was really in that like late 90s literally Jay Dilla, one of his first projects, right? Like, yeah, but that sound, that Jay Dilla sound is so clear, but like you don't necessarily equate Jay Dilla with De La, but at the same time, you think about like that was the proper path, because if you think about like the Native Tongues and the what was their movement called, like the Roots and Common and Erica,
the
Soulquarians, like that seemed like the natural evolution of the Native Tongues anyway. So it kind of made sense, even though at the time it was like, what is this? What is this sound coming out of Pazanu's and Trugoy's record? And it was like, but then if you in the hindsight of history, you look back and say, of course, the Soulquarians and Native Tongues would be like a natural evolution of it.
I mean, the NERD too.
Yeah.
Pharrell has been on record saying how much like Tribe and the rest were like so important to him, how much that whole sound was important to him. But there's so many sons of De La, right? So many people that if it wasn't for De La Soul, their rhyme schemes, because I remember seeing De La Soul's, I think their second concert ever, and they were one of the worst live bands I've ever saw in my life. It was a painful concert to be witness to, but they were technicians. Like they became probably one of my favorite live acts ever outside of the Fugees and the Roots. Because unlike a lot of people who now can just go out, now these hip hop kids have zero stage presence. They cannot rock a show. You look at De La Soul in their 50s, and they're still destroying stages.
In celebration of the release, they just had that special concert. I think, was it in New York?
Yeah, Webster Hall.
Where Paz, held it down and celebrated Trugoy. And let's talk about that, because I think one of the saddest celebrity deaths, and there have been many over the last couple of years, but I think it was just something about the timing. I actually mentioned this on Hard NOC a couple weeks ago when he passed, that like, because we knew this day was coming, we knew March 2nd was coming, and De La finally getting their catalog back, finally getting that music out to the masses. And again, all the love that's being heaped on these albums from folks that you like never talked about De La Soul before. And the fact that Trugoy, aka Dave, aka Plug 2, aka The Dove, like, as much as I love Positive News, he's the voice I associate with De La Soul the most. Like when he's on that Tribe song, Award Tour, he's so clearly recognizable, right?
Oh my God. Yeah.
that it's almost like, oh yeah, that's the collab I've always wanted, which happens all the time actually. Like, I don't know what I mean by always wanted, because like the first song I ever heard from De La was like a collab with Tribe Called Quest. But anyway, like the fact that he passed like 2 weeks before De La was re-entering the conversation, that the timing of that, I feel like, is what made it so sad.
I mean, it not only meant, because we all knew, like when we saw like that, I think Mass Appeal did a little quick documentary about the Anonymous Nobody, which was like one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns of all time, right? To produce that album, that we knew that he had like that belt that shocks him back to life if his heart went out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we knew that there were some problems, and for him to like the bittersweetness, I think you said that word, I think it's a perfect word to say, where he, like, on the eve of basically the renaissance of their rejuvenation, resurrection, kind of in the public consciousness. I'm like, Justin Timberlake was right there. Like, God, take Justin, leave Dave, leave Dave. Like, God, Kanye West was right there. Like, why did you miss him? And it just, because, and the thing is, I always thought of Posdnuos as the boxer of the group, whereas Dave was the gas that kept the boxer going.
Mm.
Like, he was the wind. He was the one who was the heart. He, like, if you hear Dave, like, I think for some reason, I think like say, for example, I'm not that I'm comparing them, but I want to just do an illustration of De La and Tribe, right? We know for a fact that Q-Tip is a musical absolute genius and one of the best producers ever in hip hop and just music in general. We know that. But he also has a distinct enough voice where he is thought about more. We think about Fife rapping. Fife is actually more intricate in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Fife is actually spitting at a different level. Whereas Dave and Paz, who I love together, Dave was spitting at a level that was unbelievable. And I love them both, make no mistake. But there was something that he said, and I was just like, I cannot believe how this dude is spitting. I mean, I think it was, what was it, Steak? Oh man, was it like, oh, Stakes is High. You know, I'm sick of bitches shaking asses, sick of talking about blunts, sick of Versace glasses, sick of slang, sick of past after war shows, sick of name brass flow. Like, he just starts, like, the way it flows in the commentary in that was just like, can we stop being caricatures of ourselves and be authentic? And it was just, yeah, I mean, Dave was just this MC. And it's not even just like Dave. You think about how many members of the hip hop nation we've lost in just 3 or 4 years.
But I'm glad you brought up the Tribe and Fife comparison, because I felt the same way, was it, God, now 7 years ago, Jesus Christ, when Fife passed and then Tribe put out that last album, We Got It From Here.
Yeah.
And, Fife's still on that record, right? Like, because he recorded, and that was like their reunification after, like, they had a fault, like Fife and Tip. To your point, like, everyone thinks of Q-Tip when it comes to, I don't believe, and you may know better than me, I don't believe De La ever had any kind of like falling out between their members.
De La is what every married couple should aspire to. Like, you gonna go 30 some odd years with no public beef?
Right. But like, but Fife and Tip had a very public falling out for many
all
years.
The time. And I mean, and Michael Rappaport caught it on film.
Exactly.
I mean,
so for them to reunite and then put out, and a lot of people kind of like have negative things to say about that last record. I really liked it only because of the emotion it brought. Like, the We the People song, hearing Fife on it, seeing them perform it without him, that I think puts it on a pedestal for me. De La doesn't have, I don't believe, anything coming out. I mean, this is all about the celebration of their catalog.
Yeah, but they're supposed to be doing an album that was with all Pete Rock, produced. Supposed to come out, and I'm not sure when that's dropping, but that was supposed to be like all of that.
But the timing is similar to me, right? Like, to see like Fife to pass right before Tribe was like re-entering the conversation several years ago, and now we have the same thing here. I don't know. It's just, and to your point, right, like, you can add Trugoy to like the very long list of not just celebrity deaths, but like to your point, hip hop deaths.
Yeah.
Of people, again, people who are not old,
No, I mean,
Not that
God,
far
you
away
know,
from the age that Trugoy was.
I mean, and me and Fife were boys, and so that
Right,
was just
exactly.
like loony. Not that's not why I'm bigging him up for his lyrics. He was a dope lyricist. I mean,
Yeah.
but like the diabetes. I mean, after even getting transplant from his
Right.
wife, Malik didn't make it. Then you think
Yeah.
about Sean Price. You think about Bismarcky and Heavy. I mean, like it's the numbers are, and part of it is black men don't go to the hospital. I mean, a lot of it, I mean, just the amount of people that we lose and what is lost. It's kind of like when an elder dies in your community and nobody's recorded their stories, right? Like somebody who's contributed to the culture is lost. What do we lose as a collective? Because one of my greatest things I want to do is do an immersive experience for De La Soul, like from ARGs to VR to immersive, kind of like a Meow Wolf of De La Soul. Like that would be one of my number one things to do, because I've been doing a lot of immersive theater design work lately. And that would be something that would be dope to me, because there is something that is missing by not having De La Soul in the entire native tongues, altogether. But that movement that we're missing in the public discourse to let us know that we can get back to something that's going to be helpful to us.
So, Brittany,
Yes.
you're a big fan of Paramount Plus, aren't you?
Oh, I am. Indeed. That is the home of one of my favorite shows, which I know some people, I've talked about it.
Yeah.
Before.
You're not the demographic.
I know I'm not the demographic, but the show I'm talking about is obviously Yellowstone. If you don't know, I love Yellowstone, and it's literally one of the most, like, I'm saying, I know a lot of people like, oh, it seems like it's for like rednecks or something like that. I promise you, the drama is so good. It's just, and if you're a fan of Twilight, there's like, an actor from Twilight that's on there.
Well, it's one of the biggest shows in the world.
Yes.
And it's got these like great spinoffs, right? Because isn't 1923 a spinoff of Yellowstone and 1883? Am I getting those years correct?
No, it's 1923. I'm not there yet on the spinoffs.
But it's got like Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. Like,
yes.
That's crazy that those are like actors you get for TV shows.
Tim McGraw and Faith Hill are on the 18 one, if you are a country fan, which Tim McGraw is honestly a really great actor. Don't know if you've ever seen Friday Night Lights, but he's a great actor. So they're great. Those are great things to check out. I have to wait for my mom and brother to watch it because we are such a fan of the show. Teen Wolf is also on Paramount Plus, and they released a new movie with Tyler Hoechlin is in it and back. So I'm excited to watch that finally when I get around to it. I know it's been like 2 months now, but it's hard to coordinate our schedules.
Well, the reason we're bringing up Paramount Plus is that if you click on the link in the description to this podcast, you can actually stream Paramount Plus for 1 month for free. We're just excited that we get to share Paramount Plus with all of our listeners. So click on the link that you see in the description and stream Paramount Plus for free for a month. Try it. If you don't like it, you can cancel. But if you love it, if you love Yellowstone, Teen Wolf, Star Trek, all of the Star Treks are on Paramount Plus. Do that, and you'll help us out in the process.
I think hip hop has failed us in this political moment, because you have people who are pseudo-political, like Killer Mike. When you actually listen to Killer Mike, you're just literally like colonialism disguised in blackface, and a lot of your stuff, or capitalism, pardon me, disguised in blackface. I mean, and I love Run the Jewels, make no mistake. LP's one of my favorite MCs and producers. But you think about Killer Mike, and he says all this stuff, you're like, bro, it's not fight the power. It's get the power, which is a different conversation that we should be having. And I think that what De La did without being overtly political was show us there was another way, that we could talk about, we could be authentic. I mean, even the funny stuff like Biddies in the BK Lounge, it was like the vulnerability that they use, even on De La Soul is Dead. And say when he got shot, like, damn, like, wow, like that's what you're gonna do. But I mean, they were taking, I think one of the most important hip hop song of all time is from De La Soul. I think it's Millie Pulled a Pistol on Santa when De La Soul is Dead. I mean, like, besides Nikki B, Daddy's Little Girl, we're not talking about that. And Afrika Bambaataa has found out to be, possibly a huge child molester, right? One of the architects of hip hop. And then you got De La Soul talking about it in a way that's a fairy tale,
right?
But no less impactful. And then, of course,
also one of the most depressing Christmas songs of all time. But
of all time, and then Atmosphere, of course, did a sequel to it, which they weren't qualified to do.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I also, talking about like how De La was kind of being reintroduced to a whole new generation. And you've written about this on the Nerds of Color. One of my favorite cultural moments of the last several years was De La and Teen Titans Go. Because, Teen Titans Go is one of those kind of like divisive shows where like you have one segment of the fan base feels like it's disrespectful and it's kind of like dumbing down, these high-minded superheroes. I'm like, all right, whatever. And then there's folks like us who love the shit out of some Teen Titans Go and also recognize Teen Titans Go is one of the smartest, talking about like they understand DC Comics history better than some of the so-called DC.
Better than Zack Snyder, better than all those people. Better than Jeff Johns, better than all those people.
And so for them to have a whole ass episode, I think, was there more than one? I feel like there was a couple, but I know there was the one.
Yeah, I don't know if there was another one.
Did they never come back? I thought maybe they had come back once.
Yeah.
Maybe because Cartoon Network reruns Teen Titans Go so many goddamn times, but
no, they absolutely do. But no, that episode was just, oh my God.
So for those of you who may not know, I'll put a link to Shawn's write-up about this episode. There was an episode, I forget which season, it was a couple years ago, where De La Soul, the actual members, Mace, Trugoy, and Pasanus, did their own voices, showed up, and they teamed up with the Teen Titans Go to fight essentially Tommy Boy Records.
Yes, to get their rights back. But the thing is, what was so dope about that for me, my daughter at the time, it was like 13, 12, whatever she was, 13, was able to understand my love for De La and why I'm rooting for them through that cartoon. She understood copyright and musical, like she got this crash course into how the record industry works. She got the real 4,080 rule. Like she was able to do the cartoon. And that cartoon made her a fan of De La Soul. And so it's crazy how I played in the house all the time, right? But she's a visual generation kid. I mean, that's just what it is. And so she was able to if they're willing to rock out with Teen Titans, who I love, then they must be dope. But then, I show her all the album covers. I'm like, look at the 3 Feet High and Rising cover. This is Teen Titans Go.
Yeah.
Look at the day glow color. Look at the wildness, right? And she was just like, her mind was just completely blown.
Yeah. And just the kind of like the melding of those two worlds. It seems so disconnected, cognitive dissonance, but it worked perfectly.
Oh, I mean, but the thing is though, because even then, like we talked about it earlier in this podcast, was like they had comic strips inside their J cards, right? Like they had their references, talking about rap superhero. And first of all, we need to stop pretending that there's a divide between hip hop and comic books and superhero fan, because there's not.
Yeah, never has been.
Never has been. There's nothing more superhero fandom than calling yourself Tony Stark.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, that goes back to like the liner notes of Fear of a Black Planet, where Chuck D and Flavor Flav is the Batman and the Joker. And
yes.
I mean, the S1Ws, for God's sake, is essentially
the S1W, security of the first
Terminator
world.
X. Come on.
I mean, like sci-fi, fantasy, comic books, hip hop, it's
always
literally comes from it's from the same ecosystem, from the same stem. And to try to separate them or try to like build a hierarchy is stupid, because I hate when people try to like disrespect quote unquote hip hop. I'm like, dude, you wear a sports jersey and never bounced a ball. Like, and you paint your face. That's just Dungeons and Dragons without dice. Just calm down.
I think they've, as a sports guy, like they've embraced a little bit of it by embracing like fantasy sports, right? Where it's like,
exactly.
Fantasy football is basically Dungeons and Dragons for jocks, It
really is. I mean, and so we need to be honest about that. But for me, I just think that what was so important though was when you look at, like, think about plug one, plug two, a phrase called talk. They created an entire world. Like you could actually, off the first 3 albums, you could build a De La Soul role-playing game, a portal role-playing game, and just dipping through different worlds easily.
I mean, and even like later stage De La, where they had, I don't think they ever released the 3rd part, but then they have like the artificial intelligence.
Mosaic from Bionics. Yeah. Right. Artificial, and then even those were like, and then another really funny part is when you look at the Redman song with them, ooh, and they're doing Wizard of Oz.
Right.
All just back when videos had budgets. And
when they did music videos for MTV.
Yeah, they did music videos, and like, ooh, 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 like a doom, 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 like that. That's just like, and then you also, I think one thing about De La too is that they have these moments where they're just De La moments. Like, for example, the bass line intro to Break of Dawn,
Mhm.
boom, 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 boom. It's just weird. It's like, what? Like, what is this? And then, we can't front about how Parliament Funkadelic has been overly sampled. But as soon as Me, Myself, and I comes on, nobody's thinking about Parliament Funkadelic. They're thinking about De La Soul every single time that beat comes on. And that is a powerful, indelible mark they've made.
Yeah. I actually wanted to end on what is your favorite De La track, which I'm sure is going to be difficult. So I'll give you some time to like sit down and think about.
That's like saying, do I want to eat pizza or my kid? No, I'm kidding.
Right. Like, so I'll let you think about your favorite, but I'll use this opportunity to share my favorite because of like what you just said. And it's because, to your point about like samples, like if you think about the late 80s, everyone was sampling P-Funk, everyone was sampling James Brown. De La was sampling Hall & Oates.
Liberace.
You know what I'm saying? They made Hall. I mean,
Yes.
I love some Blue Eyed Soul, whatever,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
they made Hall & Oates funky. You know what I'm saying? Say No Go is probably my favorite De La song. And it's just because, like, to your point about like innovative sampling, like no one thought, let me not just sample, like classic jazz, or because that's what Tribe was doing, right? They were sampling like classic Charlie Parker or whatever, but they were like, let us sample the fucking pop record that's playing on the white side of the radio station,
on the adult contemporary station,
and make that shit funky.
It was, and I mean, and it's great. And there's a great De La Soul remix album where they just flipped that to a whole different level. I mean, I think, oh damn, I hate your guts. This is a hard question. I will have to probably say, because it has one of my favorite MCs of all time, Rock Cocaine Flow. Which De La and MF Doom from The Grind Date. I think that's probably my favorite De La song. Like that's a song, if I'm like mad at somebody, I have to go to a meeting, or I don't like that person. That's the song I put on to like steel myself for a crap interaction.
Oh man. So I'm glad that you were able to find some time, because like I said,
absolutely
couldn't not talk about De La because that was to me probably the biggest thing that happened. Again, we're recording this the Monday after De La Soul Day, and you're listening to this essentially the 1 month anniversary of De La Soul's music streaming on all services. I just want to give you the last word here to just what is your biggest takeaway, not only of like De La's influence and musical career, but like what it means now that their music is available to everyone? Because to your point, no one's buying their music was always available like on CD and cassette and vinyl and everything for the last however many years. But now that it's available for folks, because the way people listen to music now is completely different from how you and I listen to music.
Yes.
So what is your like essentially the takeaway?
I mean, part of it is bittersweet, because I think sometimes streaming makes things more ephemeral, and you can just like skip through and it's out of sequence, because I think that album sequencing is one of those is a lost art. But what I really hope that De La does is having us streaming influences a nerd kid like me. Like, I will say this with no hyperbole. If not for 3 Feet High and Rising, I'd probably be dead right now. And that's just like facts. And I'm really hoping that there's a kid out there who's struggling with being trapped between multiple worlds of, not being, stereotypically Black or enough for the Black folks, and not, white enough for the white folks, and not this for those folks, that they listen to De La Soul and realize that screw everybody. I'm going to wear my hair this way, wear these clothes, and I'm going to live in it in a way that nobody can rock me off my square.
It's all about the inner soul, y'all.
Always. Long live De La Soul. Rest in peace, Dave Trugoy Jalacour.
With that, Shawn Taylor, what you got going on? How people find you on the internet?
I suck at social media. I suck at all of it. I'm just no good. But I have a book coming out. It's called The Alphabet for New and Expecting Fathers. It should drop on Father's Day. If I can get my edits in, it will drop on Father's Day. And then I am working on this book called Afrofuturism, a Cartography, hopefully first quarter of next year. It's about like the spaces and the places of Afrofuturism. And so hopefully that'll work out. But I'm at Real Love Punk on Twitter, which I'm no good at. Don't have Instagram. Don't do anything. I'm no good at any of this shit, because I like, you want me to write for free? Like, it's just frustrating. So.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at @TheRealChow, _real_Chow, and on Instagram at RealKeithChow. Follow the Nerds of Color at the Nerds of Color on every platform, and go to hardknockmedia.com to rate and review this podcast Support us on patreon.com/the nerds of color and subscribe to our videos at youtube.com/the nerds of color. And until next time, Shawn, we're going to have you back on the Hard Knock proper.
Yeah, I got to get back on this. Like I said, for me, it's the time difference sometimes because like I have a theater kid and the amount of stuff that they have to do is unbelievable.
I feel like we should end on like a De La line. What's a good because I started with a ring ring. We got to end on. What's a good lyric to end on?
It's thematic focal point, bringing damage to your burrow with some brothers from the east with the beats that be thorough. I solo gravitate, now I'm bound to pull it. I get down like brothers are found, ducking from bullets. Gun control means using both hands in my land.